Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather Update brought to you by Ag South Farm Credit. Well, I got to start you off with the big news we had over the weekend, which was the powerful low-pressure system that actually began life more than a week ago in New Mexico. It came through parts of the Red River Valley, dove right down here into Florida, dumping a tremendous amount of rain, clipping this part of Georgia, and then on Sunday rolling up the East Coast here. Now, as you look at the map, you can see that we're getting way up here above the 6-inch mark on my color bar in a lot of areas. And some of this rain was just exceptionally heavy. And of course, we know we watched in the news all day Sunday about the localized flooding that happened in parts of South Carolina. I want to give you a little bit closer view of what that looks like. So this was through 10 p.m. on Sunday night when I was recording this. And we can see just a large swath here of rainfall amounts that were well in excess of 6 inches according to the radar estimations. Same thing for down here in this part of South Carolina as well. Now, that's not to disregard how heavy the rain has been in North Carolina and in Georgia, but I'm just looking in at that stripe right into this area. If you're curious what it looked like on satellite, this was late in the evening on Sunday, but let me show it to you during the day. Some pretty intense and deep convection, making a quick and deep draw, though, on the moisture coming off of the Atlantic here. And this low just was wrapping itself up. I mean, this is a classic nor'easter without the cold air. And had it had cold air to work with, man, this would have been a big snowmaker. I would have been talking about snow for you guys had this system had that cold air in place, but it just doesn't. That's something we're going to talk about here in a little bit. On radar, it looks something like this. This is just a full animation throughout the day on Sunday, getting into late Sunday night, of how slow that moved up the East Coast, just delivering those locally heavy rains. Now, for most of us, by the time you wake up and see this on Monday morning, the system's out, and we're going to be kind of recovering from the locally heavy rainfall. But this was what we were talking about for the last couple of months. We expected to see stuff like this happen. We've had a problem over the last few months, though, and that's that the models have not done the best a job predicting this. In fact, even with this system, I went back and looked a week ago. I want to show you what I worked on Sunday afternoon. So I'm trying to gauge how well the models are doing in other metrics that aren't often shown. So I wrote some code that can go in and compare the European model forecast to what's called the MRMS. That's these maps, okay? And now we're going to look at a week's long worth of data, not just 3 days here. And what I did was I compared the forecast I gave you a week ago, just up through midnight Sunday. So this does not even include the rainfall we got on Sunday throughout the whole day. And what you notice in through here, as you look at this carefully, is that the European model, if you look at these colors right in through here, so these are negative numbers, that means the European model was way too wet here. And then we have the blue colors, the European model is way too dry, which means the model overperformed here and underperformed up the East Coast. And we saw some extremely heavy rains as a result of that. So we're just trying to keep an eye on, which model's doing the best. And I've only worked it through the ECMWF. I'll work on the other models as well so we can kind of continue to look at that. But this was a pretty powerful event. And as you look right now, this was late in the night on Sunday. We still have, right out here, there's a tornado watch in this part of North Carolina. We've got the flood watches out here, this high wind advisories that are out for the Appalachian Mountains, Blue Ridge Mountains, and down in South Carolina. On the back side of this system, there's still this tight pressure gradient. So some of you last night probably did not get much sleep because of the strong winds plus the flooding. I don't know about you all, but every time major rainfall events like this happen, I cannot sleep because I just listen for my sump pump. That's all I do all night long, because nothing beats, nothing's worse, than a flooded basement. Now look on the backside of this. See these winter weather advisories that are out? There's some cold air, and it's going to be putting down some snow in the Appalachian Mountains. Take a look at this. This is 6 a.m. Sunday morning, 7 a.m. Eastern time. And on the backside of this, we're expecting some pretty powerful snow squalls, and they'll push right up against the Appalachian Mountains here and could locally put down, just briefly, some very, very heavy snow. But your winds are going to shift around and come out of the west-northwest, and they're going to be chilly on the backside of this. Now, what we have to assess is when's the next round, because as the week progresses, we build in a lot of higher pressure and things calm down a bit. So I'm going to get to that in just a few moments. But since this is kind of my last video of this year, my next video will come to you. I think I'm going to put it out there on January 2nd. I'm going to take, of course, next week off due to the holiday, and then I'll get you that video on January 2nd. So we got to cover a lot between now and then. So let's get some stats down before we do that. First one I'm going to show you, this is a graphic that shows what we call the water year to date. So in the United States, we define a water year as October 1st to September 30th. So they start over every October. And there are several reasons for this, but the big one is that's when the western United States wet season is. So it's just an important start-stop point. Now, since the beginning of this water year, we've been dry. Now, this does not include, because it only goes to 7 a.m. on the 17th, Sunday. It does not include the rain we just got. It does down here in Florida, but not the stuff that came through later in the day on Sunday. So we were drier here, drier into the Mid-South, drier into the Tennessee Valley, the Mississippi Valley. The Mississippi River is still several feet below low stage, and the soil moisture in the Midwest is low. California, Arizona, Nevada, all very dry. But we have been predicting, confidently, to be honest with you, that this was all going to change as we progress through winter. And lately it has. Now, not out west, but since December has started, there's been some better precipitation getting into place, like in North Carolina, Virginia. And of course, we just had the really wet conditions that rolled through, just this weekend. So there's plenty to talk about in terms of a pattern change, but I did want to show you this as well. This is just kind of for context. For those of you thinking about the rest of the country in terms of snow, or at least along the Appalachian Mountains, the season to date percent of normal. So this doesn't compare to the end of the season. It compares to now. Historically, we've not seen a whole lot of snow in the Appalachian Mountains. And a couple of places where the bigger snows were, these were back in October or November. This has not been snow as of late. And the West needs a lot of snow as well. So I was thinking about these bigger, broader statistics, and I want to share a couple things with you. The Southeast, okay, so this includes all of Ag South's territory. If you look at December precipitation, going back to 1895 to present, I want to show you that since about 1970, and even before that, I just picked 1970 because it's a good starting year for this analysis. We've actually been getting wetter and wetter with time. Now, how much? It's not too much. It's in the realm of about 1/2 of an inch of total accumulated precipitation. But what I also want you to notice is the volatility in December precipitation now versus the past. We can kind of see these bigger spikes up and down. In fact, some of our wettest Decembers have all happened since 2010, or 2009, excuse me. So thinking about that, thinking about what we just saw, it's important to see that these late season events can be quite substantial. Now, on the temperature side of it, even though we've had colder air again, and we've had frosts that have made it all the way to the coast, we've had frost that got down into Florida, that's happened. You just average it out, and what we find is that we're on the warmer side of the distribution overall. It's been very mild across the northern tier of the United States. Now, I've been thinking about this in context of historical averages and also within the context of El Nino. We're going to hit both of those things right now. So Southeast average temperatures for December, again, 1895 to last year, and the trend line is from 1970. So what is it? We're on average, about 3 degrees warmer than we were in the 60s and 70s today. So we've been having these later onset winters. In other words, they've not come in big in December with cold air. They've been later in the season. We're still calling for that during this winter of 23-24. But I mentioned, what about El Nino? So El Nino continues to persist, but the colder water here, part of what we call the negative PMM, the colder water there called the negative Pacific Decadal Oscillation, or PDO, and the cold water down here in the South Pacific has limited, I think, the expansiveness of this El Nino. And as we've said many times, some of the projections for this were up there 2 to 2.5 degrees C above average. And where are we? We're barely at 1.5. I think this El Nino has plateaued. And the question is, do we get full El Nino behavior in the pattern for the remainder of winter? Because it plateaued right now. It is expected to fade, but not right away. So you might have saw an article about this last week or heard somebody talking about it. Oh, El Nino is going to crash. It's not, okay? It's going to take months for this thing to evolve back toward neutral conditions. Maybe by spring, we'll be talking about INSO-neutral conditions. And then maybe by summer, the return of La Nina. It's not only the CPC that thinks this, but another model, the CFSV2, thinks it as well. We're at the peak, slow fade into spring, neutral. By spring, maybe La Nina down here could be a decently strong one by the time we get into next summer, next fall. Now, why do you care about that? You care about that because right now, the ocean temperatures are already very warm in this area. So let's just jump way ahead and then we'll come back. If this is maintained, this warm corridor, but this goes away and goes back into La Nina, we start to break down the wind shear risk in this area, which starts to increase the threat of tropical systems. Now that is, gosh, what are we? We're 10 months away from that discussion, 9 months away from that discussion. But I want to let you know, I'll be discussing it as we go forward. The risk of next season's hurricanes could be elevated. But in the near term, we just need to remember that we are going to be watching El Nino plateau now, probably 3 to 6 weeks of a plateau, and then a slow fade through spring. Okay, so is this winter behaving like El Nino? And in some regards, you'd say, well, sure, look at this. This is every El Nino since 1960. And you notice very mild north and near normal, cooler than normal south. And I showed you, we had that. Now, actually, we were much more mild overall across the United States than what we would say the previous El Nino Decembers have looked like. But what about on the precipitation side? Well, I'll tell you something. What just came through in the last 24 hours is going to help us get to this point because we were not overly wet. What is still missing is back here in Alabama and in Mississippi, this is an area that still needs to fill in. Now, could we say it matches up pretty well? Sure, California's been dry so far, but not here. It's been much, much wetter there. And this area in through here, nope, we've been drier in through here until this past system just rolled through this past weekend. So we start to see some El Nino-like behaviors in this, but it's not fully latched on. I'm going to give you the culprit in just a few minutes as to what I think is in more control of this pattern. But we do need to play this game, okay? And the game is, all right, Eric, you said El Nino plateaued. What about January and February? We still have it on. Will we be wetter, continuing to be wetter throughout this area? Well, I think yes, but maybe don't over-attribute it to El Nino. Wait until I show you what I think the MJO is going to do as we enter January. And you got to watch Alaska, okay? That's what we got to watch. So again, this is January to February for all years where El Nino peaked in winter and started to fade. And by the way, what did the temperatures do? Man, it got cold. We did have cold air finally in place in January and February, and the East Coast needs to be preparing for this. Now, I'm not making some big audacious claim as to what winter is going to be. But there are indications that there's going to be an active East Coast storm track this year. We've been talking about it forever, right? These systems that come out of the panhandles, we call them panhandle hookers. They hook down south and take off. Paducah lows, Arklatex lows, Gulf lows, you all make this turn. And the colder we can get the air in this place, the better the chances are of some good Appalachian Mountain snows. The better the chances are that these systems continue to deliver a strong pull on the moisture and then deliver that rain farther into New England. So this winter is going to be active. So here we go. What did I tell you to watch? We're going to watch El Nino, but we're also going to talk about Alaska, and we're also going to talk about MJO. Now, why am I not saying anything about the North Atlantic? Because the North Atlantic isn't helping just yet. I normally love to see ridging here as long as we can bring it back farther into Greenland. As it stands, lows like the one that are going to race up the coast early this week, you just watched it come through you yesterday, they don't have their full potential to grab that really, really cold air. And the problem is Alaska. Now you watch, over the next 15 days, that Alaska trough is just persistent. And because of it, what it's doing is it's kind of changing the flow like this across North America, where it's coming in over the top, something like that, with troughs coming in underneath. Now, the troughs coming in underneath are what we have to watch because they sneak through on the subtropical jet and race up the East Coast. But if you want to get cold air in to get some snow in those Appalachian Mountains, Blue Ridge Mountains, you want to get some snow in there, you got to have blocking on both the Greenland and Alaska to make that occur. And I'm out here all the way to the 27th, 28th, 29th, and oh man, we're going to watch this carefully. But what's kind of, I hate to say, but ruining the pattern is what's going on here. You see, this, not the right setup. I'd rather see deep troughs coming in here and then ripping up the coast without this complementary ridge to the north. Then the whole country would be in business with this pattern. But as it stands, we got to pay attention to these troughs. They're still coming in. They're not anchored to Arctic air yet. Why? Alaska's stolen that. But there are going to be, well, we're going to have the potential for kicking off systems. So what do we have? Now, my maps are going to be problematic because I'm recording this on Sunday night, And through Sunday night, all I have available to me is the midday Sunday runs. So remember, the rain that you see right here, this has already fallen. So this is already here. When is our next chance? It's going to be several days. It's going to be late this week and this weekend. So we got to wait on the next system to come rolling through. So I want to show you when that gets here. So I'm just going to remind you that what you just saw on that map included what already came through throughout the day on Sunday. But watch this. Ready? Here goes Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. See, I've told you, we get through this week dry. When are we seeing our next chances? Watch this. You see it right here on Saturday, coming over the lower Mississippi River Valley, getting into Sunday. It's going to probably be late next weekend that we get our next system that kind of rolls through. So most of this week coming up is going to be drier. If we add it all up, remember, this has already fallen as of Monday morning. So this was Sunday's rainfall. When does the next shot come? I'm moving fast here. Thursday, Friday, Saturday. There it is. It's trying to come in over here. This is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Maybe it's then. Late weekend, early next week is our next chance of getting some precip. And please don't look at the numbers and assume anything. This is going to change a lot over the time period. But I'm just trying to give you some idea on the timing of this. Now, what's helping bring that along, which again, what I'm talking about here would be right around Christmas, is this super long jet extension here. That's over 6,000 miles. And the piece on the southern side of it, the subtropical jet. That's it. So what we're talking about when we get out that far is that the whole next 15 days, wetter, 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 right? And some of this is coming right now. Mid-South is drier. Parts of the Midwest are drier, despite the snow squalls coming on Monday and maybe a little bit into early Tuesday. This is the pattern we seem to keep around for a while. Now, if I looked at, you know what, let's skip this map because it's not going to be intuitive given that it's the 12Z run. Let's get here. What about beyond that time frame? Let's now go from the beginning of the new year to the 12th of January. Cooler risk, wetter risk, that continues. Drier in the interior. I'm talking about the Mid-South, Midwest. This seems to be a pretty robust forecast given that I think El Nino has a bit of a grip on this pattern. And it's being echoed by the new January forecast that was put out by the European model on Sunday. Notice, wetter down here in January, active in January for the whole southern tier of the United States. I'm biting into this. This is making some sense to me overall. Now, what did I tell you? I said, is this El Nino? Partly. Is it more Gulf of Alaska trough? Yes, that's what's helping control and keep the deep troughs across the southern tier of the United States. But it also helps that the MJO is in its right position. So keep that in the back of your mind because this is what it's also doing to the temperatures. Ready? There's Monday's highs. Look at the heat pouring into the midsection of the United States while snow squalls roll through this section of the country up to the Appalachian Mountains. So Tuesday's bitterly cold here. I mean, just how many times have I ever told you that the temperature in Raleigh is going to be possibly 12 to 15 degrees colder than Montana? Like Great Falls on December 19th. Like that just blows my mind. That's how cool it is here compared to how warm it is in the middle part of the country. Well, there's Wednesday, getting into Thursday. We move into this very busy travel weekend. This is Friday. Remember, we start off most of the travel weekend very dry. It's going to be late in the weekend, early next week that the rain tries to come in. We already saw when that timing was. So where's the link to the colder air? Well, it's in Alaska and it's not getting here. Look at this, day 5 through 10. We stay relatively mild overall. Now, it's December, so it's not like it's shorts and T-shirts every day, but it's not cold yet. Take a look at what happens, though, as we begin this new year. Look at that cooler air start to show up. You say, where's that coming from? That's coming from the fact that the big, deep troughs are diving into the west like this, and there's this subtropical piece of the jet racing underneath it. And that's what I think is going to be the mainstay of the front half of January. It's what happens after that that brings me back to those three key areas: El Nino, MJO, Alaska. Now look, the MJO over the next couple of weeks is trying to get out of the Western Pacific and come back into phase 1, which is Africa. Now, if it's able to do that, we end up getting this pattern. Now, does this look familiar? Trough, ridge over the top. There's the subtropical piece, the subtropical jet, the subtropical trough. That'll move. It'll move this direction. But you see that? How quickly does that break down in January? That will be the key. It will start off by just flinging systems up the East Coast more than likely. But then what will likely happen after this is we'll introduce some really cold air at some point. Right now, the polar vortex is disrupted. It's been shoved over toward Greenland and Europe. Why? Alaska. Again, there's actually a big ridge in the stratosphere sitting over the top of the trough in the troposphere. They're stacked up and they've pushed the polar vortex out of the way. And that's why when we look at it, it's weakened. See this little line right here? That has come off of average. And now we start to have this conversation. Is the polar vortex going to line up the stratospheric one on top of the tropospheric one to deliver some really, really cold air? Possibly. We're going to wait to see when that happens, but it is not happening anytime soon. If there's cooler weather coming your way, which you saw it, right, at the beginning of the new year, that cooler weather that's coming your way, that's all complements of the subtropical jet, not polar Arctic air yet. So we look out there and say, well, what does January, February, March look like? Let's do a quick model review. European model, wetter, drier mid-south. What does the NMME show? Wetter, drier mid-south. And what does the brand new long-range statistical outlook show us? Let's go right on into North America. And guess what? It's got the same, if it'll do it there. There we go. Wetter, drier in parts of the mid-south, Midwest. Now, this map right here is probably the most representative of what will actually happen. And if I flip it over to the temperature side of it, notice we're looking at near normal temperatures for the remainder of this winter, January, February, March. So there's got to be some cold air that's going to be coming in at times. You know you got a shot of it on Tuesday, all right? That's going to be cold. But coming in after that, just be on the lookout for this back half-weighted winter. Okay, other big things happening around the world. The newest model run from the European, look at what it's doing for South America. As we approach the end of this year, it is trying to put down some very heavy rains right across some of the driest parts of Brazil. It's also bringing heavy rain into Argentina. Remember, last year, Argentina's crop production was cut in half by massive drought. Not this year. Better rains have come into place. In fact, over the weekend, a whole lot of severe weather down here, just like you saw in North and South Carolina and parts of Georgia. They had severe weather down in Argentina as well. The models are suggesting, like the European does, okay, keeping it wet in Argentina, southern Brazil, but they over the weekend trended wetter for a big section of Brazil. And just remember, this whole area up here, that's north of that line, it's all Amazon. So where's the drier holdout? It's right about here. But remember, this area on average gets between 3 and 4 inches of rain a week. That's 75 to 100 millimeters. So to be off by 35 to 50, they're still getting rain over the next couple of weeks in this area. And if it does come in, this will go a long way to stop the bleeding on this crop. So we got to watch this carefully because this isn't this week, this is next week's rainfall that we're talking about getting into these areas. The GFS is a drier model overall. You can see here that it has got a broader area for Mato Grosso, getting less than, compared to average, about 2.5 inches less than normal. So this will be critical to watch. It's going to continue to be a market story. The models have been biased too wet for the last 2.5 months. And we got to question, if the MJO gets to phase 1, it is game on. It'll rain in this area in January. If it doesn't, then we're going to continue to see this drier trend go. Lots of stuff on my plate to watch here as we finish out one year and start a new one. And the last thing I want to bring up for you is, what does the next 10 days look like globally? A couple of things to point out. Europe stays wetter. We see heavier rains, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria. We can see that parts of Africa go back over dry in South Africa, but more rain is needed. And I'll tell you something. It looks like it's a little wetter around the Panama Canal, but that's mostly in the Caribbean, the Panama Canal area. The land is expected to see near normal to drier than normal conditions. And on the temperature side of it, look at what's changed from last week. All that brutally cold air that was here is now east. Some of it's set up over Greenland. So this is a big shift that's happening. That is why I think once we get past the first couple weeks of January, we have a whole new story to talk about for the remainder of this winter. El Nino will have plateaued. It'll be at its plateau and start to fade. Other factors start to take over, and we've got lots of fun stuff to cover. So it'll be a few weeks before we talk again. I'll talk to you on January 2nd. Be safe over Christmas and New Year, but Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And I hope we all have a great start to 2024. Thanks.